Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're taking a long look back at the Minnesota Vikings 2017 season. The highs, the lows, all the, fireworks, I suppose, that went on throughout the year. It was a very exciting time, of course, and that didn't end the way that a lot of people hoped, but here we are a couple of weeks later. I'm over it. Hopefully most of the fans of the show and everything like that are as well. So let's kind of just start it off here with, Drew. We were talking a little bit before the show that this is kind of going to be a running kind of theme for the next couple shows here. Call it a segment, if you will. So let's start it off here with your peak moment from 2017. It doesn't need to be regular season specific. It doesn't need to be postseason specific. What is the one thing you remember most about this Minnesota Vikings season?
I mean, well, the Minneapolis Miracle is going to be number one, I think, just for everybody. But when you look back at the season, I think there was a clear turning point, kind of where things, where there was some uneasiness at the beginning of the season, and I think there was a clear moment where things turned around, and that was the Bears game after that first half where Bradford went in and struggled and put up, I believe, they just put up 3 points in that first half, and that was actually thanks to an Everson Griffin fumble. Forced fumble. But I think that second half and that tough win, the Harrison Smith interception at the end against Trubisky to go into Soldier Field and kind of break that sort of curse in Soldier Field. Case Keenum played an excellent second half. The Vikings got that win. I think that was kind of the turning point for this team to kind of get that monkey off their back at Soldier Field, and then kind of believe in Case Keenum for the long haul there for the rest of the season, because he came in. He had essentially just kind of given back his job to Sam Bradford. I would assume kind of the mindset everybody there was Bradford is now the starter of the rest of the season. Obviously, things didn't work out that way. He had to come off the bench, warming up probably with 10 throws there before he came out onto the field. And he put together a win. I think the Vikings scored 17 points in that second half, and he was a big reason for that. So, I think that was kind of a turning point for me. That's another moment I'm going to look at from the season outside of the Minneapolis Miracle, where I'll be, I can look back and I guess I'll be proud of the team, if that's even something that's possible for me right now. If that's an objective statement I can make as an analyst here, if I can be proud of them. But that would be one moment where I'd look back at the season, and I think that's really where this team kind of really found its groove, was that Chicago second half.
So are you saying that the Chicago game kind of represented the turning point for you, I suppose?
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. So you kind of screwed that up now, but we'll kind of keep moving here. For me, the moment, again, like you said, it's hard to surpass the Minneapolis Miracle. Like that's. Oh yeah, I mean that's the top. That might be the top moment of the entire NFL season. Period. So for me, there were a bunch of different moments. Like I guess the time when I started to really believe that, this team was sort of, I saw it quoted a lot that the Vikings were considered a, quote, team of destiny, right? And to me, when that started was right around week 10, right? Same period of time when Case Keenum was sort of finding his groove, I suppose.
Right after the bye week where he kind of really played, like for 3 or 4 weeks, played pretty much elite football.
Yeah, coming out into that Redskins game. I remember writing about this earlier this year where Case Keenum, the way that Mike Zimmer operated this season was just so different from what you're generally, expecting from a head coach, right? Like he just refused to name a quarterback, and that's his call. But I think that a lot of teams around the league also learned from this kind of the setup that Mike Zimmer prepared, right? He put together this team mentality, and you could say that the Philadelphia Eagles also followed suit. That's why you bring in DeFilippo, and you're excited about that because he's coming from a kind of a similar culture, I suppose, and a winning culture at that. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that there were so many. This was a roller coaster of a season, and part of that is because it was a roller coaster of a season for Case Keenum. I mean, Sam Bradford starts off that Week 1 game, lights it up, looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL Week 1. Yep. I remember during our show we were talking about, Bradford being this elite pocket passer, and maybe this is I mean,
I think it's still true. He is an elite pocket passer when he gets the chance to throw the football. As a pure passer, he's up there at the best in the league.
Yeah, and so that's the first turning point right there. Week 1, the Vikings got hit in the face, and they came back, right? And you see Case Keenum come in, he got hit in the face like how many times? How many bad interceptions did Case Keenum have, or how many dumb turnovers, or how many dumb mistakes where everyone was screaming, he's done, get him out of there, bring Teddy Bridgewater in, get Sam Bradford back, I don't care how you do it, make sure Case Keenum's not the quarterback, and he continued to respond. That's what he did, throughout the entire season. So, there was a lot of highs. Case
Keenum played with all kinds of pressure on him the whole season, essentially. Right. People are just kind of waiting. I think the coaching staff even too probably was kind of waiting for him to mess up and hand that job back over. He just refused to let that happen, and now he's going to make the big bucks for it, whether it's in Minnesota or elsewhere. We got to give credit to him for that. And again, the Vikings, who knows how far they get in the playoffs, but he's a very big reason the Vikings made the NFC Championship game, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess to follow that point, let's create a hypothetical here, because looking back on this season, a lot of what was kind of going on in the media and stuff like that was a function of the quarterback position, right? The turnstile of that position, where a lot of people expected Teddy Bridgewater to come in at some point in time. He only ends up throwing, I believe, 2 passes the entire year. Case Keenum was, kind of up and down, and he always had kind of the monkey on his back, I suppose, like you said earlier. Like, he had someone looking over his shoulder the entire time, and I think there's good and bad there. So for Keenum, I mean, it's tough, of course. For your personal life, like, your job isn't secure on a week-to-week basis. Yeah. That's tough. I don't care who you are. If you don't know what you're doing the very next week, like, that's tough to operate. But at the same time, it kind of creates this competitive atmosphere where it's like, if Mike Zimmer says we don't have a starting quarterback, we have the guy that I'm going to put in there on Sunday, all of a sudden you've got 3 different guys in this roster who are well aware of the fact that they are talented enough to lead this Vikings team alongside this defense. And basically it comes down to who can do what for you, and that was Case Keenum this year. So if there's one definitive turning point for me, I'm going to say it's the Washington Redskins game, because that was the game to me where Mike Zimmer could have said, all right, Keenum's coming off of a couple of poor weeks, specifically that Cleveland Browns game in London, which was not good at all. That was probably his single worst individual performance of the season. And instead of switching to Teddy Bridgewater, which, if you're on Twitter enough, you can see that there are quite a bit of people, or I should say there were quite a bit of people that were calling for Teddy Bridgewater at that point in time. I was
one of them. I mean, I know I think you might have been too.
I know
for sure was like, why not? I mean,
I wrote that.
If you're going to make the change eventually, do it now, right? That's kind of my mindset at the time.
Well, we were kind of adapting on the fly because that's exactly what the Vikings were doing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was one of those things where, like, for me, like, early in the season.
It was an unprecedented QB situation.
I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
And nothing will ever happen like that again.
It can't, because, with Sam Bradford, like, I remember looking at Sam Bradford week 1 and be like, this is a team that could seriously win, like, 15 games if he plays this well. And then the next week, he's out. Keenum looks like hell, and you're on to a situation where you're now 1-1. You're heading into Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay is, their season did not end well. Let's keep that straight. But when at the time Tampa Bay looked like a very talented team, and there's no denying the talent on that roster. I don't care how you look at it, but there's no denying the talent on that roster. What could have been, I suppose, had the NFC South had not been as strong as it was. So that was turning point number 1. Then you've got the Bears game where Bradford kind of fell apart a little bit, and you started seeing, indications that his career.
He was never together. And
it sure seemed like it.
I mean, he could. I mean, he didn't fall apart because he was never together, right? It was one of those where he probably shouldn't have been playing in the first place.
Yeah, that's probably what happened there. And then so that marks another turning point. And then you basically. You set Case Keenum up in a situation on a week-by-week basis where you basically say, all right, this is your job until you lose it. And there were so many times where Case Keenum could have, should have, maybe did throughout the week, whatever it is, could have not been the starting quarterback on the next week because of something that happened. But Mike Zimmer continued to keep him out there and continued to work with them. And that Washington Redskins game, ultimately, to me, that symbolized the quarterback that Case Keenum has become, right? We're all well aware of what happened in Los Angeles with Jeff Fisher and, Jared Goff and all of that stuff. We're all well aware of the player he was at Houston University and also with the Houston Texans. But to me, he really grew up during Week 10 because he became the guy where he not only had the balls, as Mike Zimmer likes to say, but he was making, efficient throws and taking gambles when he needed to take gambles and kind of learning from those mistakes, because he throws the stupid interception early in the game. Everyone's like, oh, here we go again. And then he ends up throwing 4 touchdowns that game, and it becomes a peak Case Keenum performance. And if I'm going to narrow it down to just one game, that was the game for me where I said Case Keenum is the real deal in this league.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got the ultimate Case Keenum performance of this season that encapsulates kind of everything he is as a quarterback in that game. I mean, you had that first half was phenomenal. Obviously, very few mistakes, made a lot of plays with his feet. One of his best throws of the season was that deep one to Diggs when he beat Josh Norman. Then you had the mistakes in the second half there that we saw more of those down the stretch. Obviously the one against the Saints, you had those mistakes that he just was prone to. And again, that part of that is what Zimmer said about him. He's got big balls. He's willing to take those chances. Sometimes they're not the best, but he's definitely going to go for it. So that's and another game that I think I'm going to point to is the Rams game. Because I think kind of going in, a lot of people in the big LA market, the Rams, they had the first round or the first overall pick quarterback from a couple years ago, Jared Goff. They had this high-powered offense scoring something like 30 points a game. They were kind of the favored team in that game. A lot of people looked past the Vikings. That was kind of the whole season they did, but a lot of people looked past the Vikings, and they after the Rams marched down in their first drive and scored, Vikings shut them out. And the Vikings really made a statement, I think, in that game that they were for real, especially at that stadium where I can't remember. Did they lose how many games they won to Detroit? I think this year.
Sounds right.
I mean, I think that's what it was. But point being, I think that Rams game was another one of those statement wins that you can look back and that will kind of serve as a defining moment of the season.
Yeah, that Rams game, I've got a buddy who's a huge Rams fan. We talk football all the time. So that was that was a fun week for me personally because we were kind of, throwing stuff back and forth at each other and that kind of thing. And the Vikings came out and did me a solid. That's the type of thing where it's like, it's the Rams are a very good team, and they're really only going to get better. You look at what Sean McVay was able to accomplish in kind of his rookie season as a head coach. So that, to me, kind of like separated the men from the boys a little bit. The Vikings are a little bit more experienced in terms of like they had – I don't want to say they've been there before because, I feel like that expression is just incorrect based off what we've seen from the Vikings over the last 4 years where it's been up and down a little bit. You had the 8-8 year. You had the postseason year that ended with the Blair Walsh field goal miss. Like there's just been so many like – I guess unfortunate events for the Vikings that it ends up becoming like instead of looking at it from like kind of like a flat line perspective, like you continue to move forward, you end up kind of rounding back to what happened the last time. And that's to me is a mentality thing. It's like if you only dig into the bad things that happened in the past and you remember those, you're probably never going to take the next step forward. That's just because that's what you are. If you remember exactly what you were in the past, and that's all it is, good luck moving forward. That's just not an easy thing to do. So for the Vikings, ultimately this comes down to a very, very successful season. And when you win 13 football games, there's simply not that many negative things to say.
Right.
Especially the way that they were able to do it. Like, it was unprecedented. It looked... There was no reason that Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray should have been able to pick up right where Dalvin Cook left off. There's no reason that Case Keenum should have came from absolutely nothing and turned into, what has been gauged by a lot of analysts I've seen as a 3-year, $48 million evaluation, which is a $16 million average annual salary.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a lot of money coming from that 1-year, $2 million deal that he signed with Minnesota.
There's no reason Adam Thielen, undrafted Minnesota State kid, should have been a second-team All-Pro wide receiver. I mean, a lot of these things, and we've talked about this before, that it seems like there's something in the locker room, I guess, or with this coaching staff. There's a mindset and aura about guys that have been proven wrong before, or excuse me, have been doubted before, and they've been proving people wrong over and over and over and over. I mean, Mike Zimmer is one example right there.
He's the perfect example.
Yeah, and it starts there, and it goes down to, moves down to a lot of the players on this team that made an impact in 2017, but on both sides of the ball.
I was kind of to your point about Mike Zimmer. I remember about probably 3 weeks ago, I was reading an article. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was the face of the article was Scott Fujita, the linebacker that played for the Saints. Yeah. And he was talking, basically his kind of, to sum it up, he was saying, I don't know why more teams don't hire coaches like Mike Zimmer.
Well, I think that was, I think I remember that article going around because it was actually, I think it was written in 2014 when Zimmer was not hired yet. And he was saying that whoever gets him is going to be, it's going to be a phenomenal hire. And he was wondering why he wasn't a more, kind of considered a top tier coaching candidate at the time. Right. And clearly he was right about that. And I think that recirculated now because of the success Zimmer had this season with, again, you lost a starting quarterback, you lost a very talented, promising young running back. And, again, more offensive line injuries and things like that. And Vikings still won 13 games. And I think he managed the QB situation, too, probably as good as you could. And we have to give a lot of credit to Stefanski and Pat Shurmur as well, obviously, right. For giving Keenum that opportunity. And but I think not naming a quarterback every week, like that seems like kind of a very new thing, an unprecedented move by a coach. I mean, and it's not
I don't remember any coach doing that.
Yeah,
and I don't blame Mike Zimmer.
It doesn't seem like it's like a revolutionary thing. Like, there's no requirement for a coach to name a quarterback as a starter.
But we kind of have that expectation, right?
Right.
As people that watch football and have been watching football as fanalists, as Aldo Gandia liked to call us when we were working at the bar room, you have the expectation every week that you're going to have the same group of players playing no matter what. So I guess what Bill Belichick does and what Mike Zimmer does, and there are other coaches too, but those are, I guess to me, those are the two prime examples here of coaches who literally, like, they don't care about your feelings. Like, they're just like, they say to you, like, all right, we're going to work hard at practice 5 days a week. This is going to be the game plan. We're going to install it on Tuesday, and hopefully, we'll have everything figured out by Friday. We'll do the walkthrough on Saturday. Let's get out on the field on Sunday and win a football game. I don't care who's out there. I don't care if C.J. Ham's playing running back or if Dalvin Cook's playing running back. Like, I don't care if it's Case Keenum or Kyle Sloter. It doesn't matter. It's just about,
right. Yeah.
Can you keep, I guess, control of the locker room is a big thing here. So for Mike Zimmer, like, he needed to earn this as well. And part of earning that respect from the locker room is the fact that he was turned down by however many teams. That's just a big...
the report, I guess, rumored, difficulties of maturity with Treadwell or Mackenzie Alexander. There was some things rumored. I'm not going to confirm that they're true or not, but I'm sure there was, given, when you have guys that are this talented and there's big egos in a locker room, there's going to be issues with people. That's just natural. But I would assume, given Mike Zimmer's past and the way he handles himself and the way he handled that, getting over that hump, there's definitely a different level of respect that you have for someone like that, and you're going to take care of those other off-field issues a lot faster than with a different coach. Say someone like Ben McAdoo, who got fired, and the Giants had, they had some off-field things go on there with. So yeah, it's just. That was an example that came to my head because he has a lousy haircut, and
he looks like James Bond if James Bond was not James Bond.
That's a pretty good soundbite. That's a pretty good soundbite. We'll have to get our sports grunt Kyle to clip that one, and we'll tweet that one because
it's my bad.
That might be the worst soundbite I've ever heard on any form of radio. Ben McAdoo looks like James Bond.
If
James Bond was not James Bond.
Yeah, that's on me. Let's move forward from that joke.
It wasn't really a joke. I guess it turned into a joke.
It's a joke now. Because I'm saying it's a joke now. So to kind of get back to, like, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this kind of philosophy that Mike Zimmer has sort of, kind of to a degree, like, because he went 13-3, there are other teams looking at what Mike Zimmer did. That's just inherent to good football teams. If you're a good football team, bad football teams look at you and they say, how can we do, that? Yeah. Or if that works for the player. Like, a good coach to me is someone who doesn't try to force their offense or their defense on a group of players. They just sort of allow it to happen. And
looking at you, Norv Turner.
Yeah, that's not wrong. It's like, it's important to me to be, if you're a coach, you have to be able to adapt to the players you have. So to me, you look at Mike Zimmer's journey specifically to get to where he is right now, and ultimately, you hope that journey finally ends in the first Vikings Super Bowl in team history. But right now, it's about, the fact that Mike Zimmer he was a champion in the 90s. People forget that he won a Super Bowl with the Cowboys, Like, he's done that before. So he has the right philosophy and the right mentality. It just took a really long time for teams to be like, all right, we want this guy as the head of our football team. And to me, that's a credit to Rick Spielman. And it's something that he doesn't get enough credit for, because Mike Zimmer has made mistakes too. It's just you don't see them right now. Like, think about the 8-8 season last year. That was like, that has to be on Mike Zimmer to a degree. You can't lose a football team after you start 5-0. Like,
I mean, he even said that too. Like, that's the thing about Zimmer too that I admire. I mean, because I think that a lot of coaches kind of use the we. I say, right. Well, we didn't do this right. We didn't do this right. It's a collective thing, which I understand. That's obviously it's a solid way of.
It's one way to do it.
Taking responsibility, but he specifically likes to point out things that he did wrong, or even against. I mean, the Eagles game is an example. He said, I didn't call a great game. I didn't do this right. Whatever.
He uses the first person, which
right.
That's in that's using the first person like that. It shows that the way that I hear it as someone, again, that I'm not a football player. I played football in high school, so I like to try to get in the heads of football players. But to me, when you use the first person like Mike Zimmer does as an authoritative figure, as a guy who has now, I think that 13-3 proves that he is a legitimate top 5-ish head coach in the NFL because of kind of the path that he's taken. He has hold of the locker room. His players respect him. All of those things are very important. And so when you look at that, and just the way that Mike Zimmer has kind of imposed his will on this team and forced them to adapt to what he was doing, that's a credit to Spielman for sticking with him through, the not great times, let's say, and waiting ultimately for everyone to sort of buy in. And that's why it's so difficult to find negatives with this Vikings team right now, because there are so many different players playing well. There are just some guys playing better than others. And again, it's a perspective thing. Like, you can look at this defense and you can say Trey Waynes is the weakest link. That, to a degree, might be true. You could make an argument for Andrew Sendejo, but like, both of those guys really stepped up big this year, and they were a big piece of like what kind of made this defense more complete. You look at all the different guys that did that, and ultimately that comes down to a locker room philosophy that Mike Zimmer forced on this team. Yeah. Legitimately, like, it's like, you listen to me or you're out. I mean, think about the way that he kind of manipulated the situation. He brings in Terrence Newman. He brings in Chris Crocker, guys that kind of knew his thing in Cincinnati. He tried to go out and get Michael Johnson twice. He tried to bring in guys that were aware of what Mike Zimmer likes to do as the head coach, and that has worked. Terrence Newman has rubbed off on guys like Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes. You look at just the way that kind of from top to bottom, the way that this team has been constructed, and this season kind of represents the epitome of everything that Mike Zimmer has been working toward, and now it's about what he does next.
Right, yeah, I mean, and again, the way he has constructed things too, while this season, like you said, I think to this point has been the epitome of, what he desired his team to look like, I assume. But now, moving forward, I think he's also set this team up really well with the chance to compete, not just in 2018, but I think beyond then, for as long as he can really coach, I think. I mean, and again, we don't know how long he's going to be coaching yet. Obviously, he's had some health concerns, but, for as long as he's coaching, it looks like this team's going to have a lot of talent there to work with. And obviously it's about getting a quarterback. It's about replacing some of those few holes that are on both sides of the ball. But there's really not a lot to replace, which means the Vikings can draft purely for talent in a lot of these, with a lot of the draft picks this year. And then again, that defense, man, it's what he's done with that defense in just 4 years, literally from worst to first. That's pretty incredible to be able to do that. A lot of that's Spielman identifying talented players. I mean, how many of those guys out there are draft picks from the Vikings? He goes. I mean, I probably shouldn't even count. It's going to take too long to count them. Really, that are just guys that Spielman and Zimmer drafted.
Right.
It takes too long. That's the entire defense. Guys that the Vikings drafted, homegrown. It's a homegrown defense. Right. I feel like that's very rare to get a defense that is homegrown like that. It's kind of what Seattle was like in 2013 and 2012. But I mean, this team is set up very, very well, and I think this is kind of that one step, that the stepping stone, I guess, to something great, hopefully in 2018.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at it like this. It's ultimately, you create the system as the owner. So ultimately, this comes down to what the Wilfs have been able to do in terms of bringing in the right guys to bring in the right guys underneath them. And so it starts with the Wilfs first, of course, and then you got Spielman underneath there, who is basically calling the shots, brings in Mike Zimmer, and if you remember correctly, Spielman was kind of taking like a risk to a degree when he brought in Mike Zimmer, because he had fired, was it Leslie Frazier at the time? Yeah, fired Leslie Frazier, and he was kind of in a situation where, like, if you don't start winning now, like, you're going to be probably on the market again. Kind of a similar thing to what happened to Spielman when he was working down in Miami. It's like, you have success, but it needs to be sustained success, and then until you prove something, and then it becomes more about, like, all right, I trust this guy, I don't trust this guy, we'll see what happens. But, like, that's Cleveland's biggest problem in my head. I remember Rob Chudzinski. You remember Rob Chudzinski? Yeah. When he was the head coach for 1 year, and there were a ton of, I read a ton of stuff from ESPN, Bleacher Report, all kinds of stuff about how the players really respected Chud. That was their guy.
Yeah, I remember this now.
They loved him, and then he ultimately he did find a job immediately after with the Indianapolis Colts. But it's like, this was a guy that had the locker room, they just didn't have the win-loss record, and he got fired. Like, that's stupid. That's straight up stupid. Like, it's more important to have the locker room than it is to have wins and losses. Like, that's what Mike Zimmer taught me. Like, that's what I have gotten from his philosophy, what he does as a head coach. He taught me that it's more important to basically have a team atmosphere, and that creates the winning culture. And I think
you have to have the locker room to come back from the collapse of 2016.
Yeah.
And win 13 games in 2017.
Yeah.
Like, you don't come back that strong. And still, I mean, even in 2017 they overcame a bunch of things too. Yeah, I think Mike Zimmer's got that, and I agree with your point here about Chud and the Browns.
That just kind of made me think too, because again, this ultimately comes down to coaching trees, right? I don't think we've ever really talked about this before, but generally speaking, when you look at when you're trying to look at a coaching philosophy and you're trying to pick out which guy makes the most sense, you look at Andy Reid's coaching tree is very good. Doug Peterson just won a Super Bowl. Mike Zimmer he's said a million different times in a million different ways that he takes a lot of stuff from Bill Parcells. And Bill Parcells' big thing was winning is the only thing, right? That was always his philosophy. And he always kind of was like a tough love guy. And, I mean, Mike Zimmer is definitely that. And tough love works. Like, it does. Like, it's...
Well, it works in the NFL, and if it doesn't work for you as a player in the NFL, then you won't be in the league very long.
Not for long, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need to be able to handle the pressure, and you need to listen to your damn coach. Like, ultimately that's what needs to happen. If the coach is willing to say to the media, "Hey, I'm the one that blew this game. I'm the reason that we lost 100-7 or whatever that NFC Championship was," it makes it that much easier for players who didn't play well in that game. You look at Harrison Smith particularly because, from Harrison Smith's perspective, that game must have sucked because a lot of fans were looking at him like, hey, like, you won Like, you played so well all year, and then you fell apart in the NFC Championship. But Mike Zimmer comes to his post-game press conference, and he says, I put my team in a position to lose. That's, like, essentially the words that I got from Mike Zimmer.
Yeah.
And that makes it a lot easier for players, like, I guess, in my opinion, it makes players it makes
they're more willing to take responsibility themselves,
right,
and more willing to
continue to work at it, right,
and learn from and respect the coach as well,
right. And so, I guess this season to me it symbolized so many different things. It was just a hell of a year. It really was, and ultimately now we kind of have reason, and that's really the biggest thing. We have hope, right, for the future, and that's what 13-3 will do for you, and that's what hosting a Super Bowl and doing a hell of a job will do for you. It creates this culture. I mean, dude, I'm living in Minnesota right now, right? And everywhere I go, people are just generally, like, more optimistic. And, like, maybe that's just my perspective, because I guess I'm more optimistic after watching this Vikings season. But at the same time, it's like the Super Bowl and what the Vikings did this year, it just made it seems like everything's just easier. It really does. That's kind of what I'm getting the sense from just living in this state. And it's that's a lot. That's Mike Zimmer. That's Rick Spielman. That's the Wilfs. That's all these players. That's all 63 players. Practice squad guys don't get enough credit for what they do in terms of scout team and preparing offenses and starting offenses and starting defenses. Like, this was a collective team effort that ended in, an NFC Championship berth. And, it didn't end the way that every team's fan base wants it to, of course. I mean,
right.
Ultimately, Ted Glover
31 fan bases were disappointed this year.
Right. Ted Glover said this to me probably 3 weeks ago. He writes for the Daily Norseman, if you're not familiar. And he said this to me, and it really resonated with me. He basically said that, it comes down to the difference between a 4-12 team and a 12-4 team is good coaching. And I think that this season is the perfect kind of encapsulation of that thought, because this team could have fallen off completely. Like, how many times? We talked about that earlier in this show. How many different turning points were there where the Vikings
how
could have
far
fallen
south
to
could the
pieces?
season have gone after Dalvin Cook tore his ACL and the Vikings lost that Lions game?
But it didn't. It didn't.
Yeah.
And it ends in the Minneapolis Miracle. I mean, the team of destiny thought, man, like, how can you not think that way? Like, this team was not supposed to win, and they kept winning. So is the argument for defense wins championships, is that real now? Like, because I think that the Vikings showed it this year. I think Philadelphia showed it to a degree this year. Defense. Maybe this
Super Bowl didn't show it, but outside of the
Right.
Super Bowl itself,
right?
I would agree, because Jacksonville, New England, Philadelphia, Minnesota, those are probably arguably the 4 best defenses in the NFL. Made it to the conference championship games. They just didn't show up in the Super Bowl, but
yeah. So I mean, it's just a different world, really. It's like I talked about this probably like a week ago or something like that. The idea of, like, kind of how quickly the NFL can change, right? It changes overnight once new philosophies are kind of imposed. And a couple years ago, it was really only the Seahawks and Patriots that were using this model of kind of like team first mentality, and now it's a lot of different teams. You can make an argument for Jacksonville, like you said, Philadelphia. New Orleans is another great example. I mean, how many different teams rotated players in and out? Like, fantasy football experts have to be pissed right now, because how are you supposed to tell me who the top 5 fantasy running backs are for next season when 2 of them might be on the same team next year?
Yeah, I know.
Like, this is it's different. The NFL is changing, and that's a good thing. That's what the NFL has always done. It's just a matter of how long have you been watching the NFL for. And now we're in a position now where we're starting to see, or at least it looks like, defense is going to begin to kind of trend in as defense first, quarterback second, everything else follows suit. That's the philosophy that I got from this NFL season. And
I mean, I think Jacksonville's showing it too, even because they, instead of breaking the bank for Kirk Cousins, they were never even in the discussion for Kirk Cousins. But they instead took or re-signed Blake Bortles on a pretty cheap deal for a starting quarterback over 3 years. And, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Blake Bortles is better than Kirk Cousins, but they're clearly saving money to use elsewhere for the collective, for the team, right? And that's how they made it that far. I mean, I think the last it would have been the 2017 offseason. They splashed on Calais Campbell and A.J. Boye, and they built that defense that way, kind of like the Vikings did. Or I guess more like Seattle did too, but they really built up their defense. And then now it's just about putting the offense together. And, I think you had a good point there. I think the Vikings are showing that, and I think now we'll see it more in 2018, hopefully. Again, Vikings are in the same situation. They need a quarterback. They have the elite defense. They have the playmakers on offense. They have the offensive line, much improved anyway. The Vikings are in a very good spot. They're in a very good spot.
I feel like that's probably a good place to end the
It's
show.
really weird to say that when the team doesn't have a quarterback. It's weird to say it anyway about the Vikings, but it's weird, even more weird when the team doesn't have a quarterback.
That is the best point that you could have made in this situation, because I really think that the statement, it's weird to say thing, I think that's what's making all of this kind of so surreal. Just because the Vikings got so good so quick with everything against them, I suppose, and Minnesota just in general is not used to that. It ultimately ended the same way as 2004, but Vikings fans have been kind of conditioned to think, well, we're never going to get to the Super Bowl anyways, so whatever.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how it's always been. So to me, this was a turning point. This was a landmark season for the Vikings. It didn't, it took me a while to get past that NFC Championship game. I won't lie. But at the same time, there's more reason now than ever to buy into this team, and that's ultimately what the NFL is trying to do, is to try to get fan bases to, buy into a mentality, buy into a philosophy, buy into the energy. That's the goal of the NFL, and the Vikings are a shining star of that, as as we had looked back at this 2017 season. So that about wraps up the About the Labor podcast for today.
You want to get into questions at all?
Yeah, I guess let's do one. We got a little bit of time.
Okay, we did. Well, we got on Twitter. We actually had one person send a couple, so we can just get into those. From Chris at Lineman2248. First one: do you think the Vikings could cut Latavius Murray, because he'd be the 5th highest paid running back in the NFL if he's kept? It looks like. So, how do you feel about the Vikings and Latavius Murray?
Well, with Murray, he kind of stated the primary point there is if he can get cut. And I believe Andy Carlson said that he was the 7th highest paid running back in the NFL.
It's something it would be high. It'd be high.
So this is a difficult question because we don't know where Dalvin Cook is in his rehabilitation process. If his knee is good, I would cut Latavius Murray and I would draft a running back in the 4th or 5th round.
You like the kind of the Dalvin Jet rookie combo. See, I would even go.
I don't even know. I like
Jet.
Not even McKinnon, really. I wouldn't pay either of those guys. And it's it's not that I don't think Murray and McKinnon are capable running backs. It's just if you're trying to plan long term, you've got Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is under contract for 3 more years. He doesn't have that 5th-year option, but that's your guy of the future. Now, the goal should be to kind of find he's the bell cow, right? That's the way I look at it. He's going to be the featured back moving forward. I would look at the draft or free agency, and I would try to bring in someone who's willing to accept, a Corey Clement type role. The way that Corey Clement was used in Philadelphia this year, where you get 8, 9, 10 touches.
And Jet has said he wants to be a featured guy, so maybe
Murray,
that's not in the cards, but...
And Murray came to Minnesota with the idea that that's what he was going to be, right? So, to me, I would let them both go, and I would go get a running back. I'll speak for Rashad Penny real quick. Why not him? San Diego State product. He looks really good on paper.
I know you like him.
He's going to be a riser, I assume, throughout draft season. I would look at him right now as a good complement to what Dalvin Cook does.
Yeah. I definitely see the pros of letting Latavius Murray go. I think it's good to keep him around because, again, you will need that insurance with Dalvin's knee and everything to have that option.
That's true.
But I will say that if Murray is gone, Garrett Blount is a name that I would love to see in Minnesota as well, with the new offensive coordinator from Philadelphia. I would. That would be. I believe he's a free agent too. So that'd be a name that I would really want to replace him. As kind of the short yardage guy. Dalvin Cook's obviously a good short yardage guy as well. But
you need two backs now. You need two running backs.
You do. Yeah.
And
yeah.
So
we got one more then from him. He just asked, why does nobody in the national media talk about Teddy Bridgewater as a possible starter? Because this is actually something. When I read this question, it made me think, and it's a really, really good observation that. A lot of the talk is Kirk Cousins or Case Keenum, essentially, right, among national media. But people have kind of shoved Bridgewater away, at least the national media have, because, he's a backup, right? He was a backup the whole season. He played behind Case Keenum. He hasn't played in 2 years. If I was a fan of another team and looking at the Viking situation, I'd be like, why would they even consider Teddy Bridgewater at this point, right? It's just that's kind of my answer to that question is because he's a backup who hasn't played in 2 years. That's what people think of Teddy Bridgewater right now. So from that perspective, it seems pretty wild to trust him as a starter or to sign him as a starter. That's kind of, I think that's my answer to sort of why the national media isn't really talking about him.
I think the simplest answer here is that he is the lesser of all three, I suppose. The easiest one to talk about is Cousins because he's the most proven. He's got a couple 5,000-yard seasons. He played, worked with Jay Gruden, who, of course, worked with Mike Zimmer when he was in Cincinnati. He sounds like a very good fit on paper. He looks like a very good fit on film, and I know that the Vikings receivers are a big fan of him as well. So he is a very good fit for what the Vikings are trying to do, assuming he's willing to take some level of a pay cut so that the Vikings can continue to do what they want to do from a salary cap perspective. That's the simplest answer to me. That's why Teddy Bridgewater is being overlooked, because you've got Cousins, you got Keenum, who's just took you to an NFC Championship. He's the third wheel. Teddy, that's the scenario here. That's why a lot of people are expecting Teddy Bridgewater to no longer be with the Vikings when things are kind of all said and done after the draft here. It all makes a whole lot of sense. It's a true quarterback carousel right now, and the Vikings have a lot of options, and Teddy Bridgewater is not one of the best of them, unfortunately. For those of you that do love Teddy Bridgewater, like I do.
Yeah, I would agree with the answer. So thank you, Chris, for the questions. I believe that's about what we have for time. We're going to try to keep our shows to about 40-ish, 45 minutes from now on here. So, and we're going to get back to doing 2 a week here. We've had some scheduling conflicts here since the Super Bowl. So we'll get back on track here with that. But yeah,
game plan moving forward here. Always, could change here, but game plan is we're going to be recording on Tuesdays and Thursdays during the off season, so we're down to 2 shows a week instead of 3. That's the only difference here. We'll continue our discussion later on this week with probably more kind of draft and free agency stuff, and again, probably looking back at a lot of 2017 stuff and just kind of speculating on what's to come for the Vikings and I guess what this 2017 season means in terms of looking at the future in 2018 and hell, even 2019 and 2020 as well. If that should always be the goal. So thanks for listening to the About the Labor podcast. We will be back later on this week with another show. And that's about all I got. Any final statement from you here?
I do not have one. I will say that I passed 200 club for bowling. I surpassed 200 in one of my games. Good. So I'm very proud of myself. That is one of my greatest lifetime achievements to this point in my life. I'm looking forward to getting 300 this week.
Okay. So
big bowling guy over here. Big bowling guy.
Big bowling guy. All right, then. Thanks for listening, folks. We will catch you later on.